All right, and welcome everybody to my YouTube page, Andrew Broussard Watercolors. I just finished up one of my master sketches. This one was looking at Herman Herzog. I believe that's how you'd pronounce his last name. It was known as Man Hunting. It was in 1871. The size was 13 inches by 20 inches. That's the first time I've been able to mention the size, or at least thought of doing that with one of these master sketches slash analysis of it. I feel that's kind of important to kind of give an idea of how it relates to what I drew, and just to get an idea of the size. This board is about 11 by 15, so if we were to add another 2 inches and another 10 inches, so I don't know if you can see my hand coming off of here. Let's move it to the side. And it wouldn't be another 10, it would be another 5, I'm sorry. So 7, yeah, so maybe about here to here would be the size, the bottom corner. So a decent size, but there's just so much going on in this one. And as we start to talk about it, first of all, I had found it in a book that I've been referencing quite a bit. And this book is Different Views in the Hudson River School, painting by Judith O'Toole. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It's just really good. It's the one that I talk about where they talk about the painters doing, comparing scenes, what kind of story they were telling, what concepts were taking place, etc. Anyway, just a brief talking about what she had said with this one. This one was kind of man's interaction with nature, and I think she had 2 samples of his paintings that had man's interaction. This one was a man hunting, a man entering wilderness for sustenance, for survival. The other one I think was a mill, and how man utilized nature and industrialized it. I'm thinking that was the 2 that she had. So anyway, I pulled the picture up online, started looking at it. This guy was trained in the German school of painting, came to America in his 30s, was painting in America during this time period. This is 1871, and apparently Germany had like just a really amazing school of just realism and all that, so I think that was what taking place here. So that's that. The first thing that obviously drew me to this one was this hunter right here, and his kind of silhouette. Whenever I sketched it, I didn't really silhouette it too much, but I was really liking the placement, and I was looking at this figure's interaction with everything around him. And what I mean by that is this. Here we have him, and here we have this kind of dead tree branch. If we draw a line across, we see that it's not perfect with it, and it kind of is offset. If we draw a line up, we see this big old, I guess, dead tree in the background, and you see how it's offset. Now there is this line right here. It doesn't line up perfectly with his head and whatnot. What other shapes? We have this one right here, another point of interest, a tree stump. Doesn't line up with his head. This edge doesn't really line up, doesn't line up with his head. It does kind of point towards it, but what I'm getting at here is, if this guy was right above it, or this one was right above it, this was perfectly in line, it would just be kind of off. And that's something I just remember from art school, is that you kind of want to move things out of the way. And when I say art school, just some art classes I had taken in college on the side. So that was the first thing, kind of the way everything was placed. In reality, that could have been right over his head, but it just makes for a better picture to have that offset. So that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was obviously this sunlight. I was trying to model it within pen and ink. I don't think I truly achieved it. It was just pretty interesting. But looking at it, it's a kind of common motif having these light beams through the clouds. And I was wondering how I could do that within watercolor. I think oils, it might be easier. Watercolor pops up in people's paintings. And I'm not sure if they paint it in and then lift it, or yesterday when I was experimenting with gouache, I noticed over the background trees and whatnot, I could do a light wash of gouache and it gave a fog effect. So it might be able to give a light beam effect with gouache, which would be really cool. This brilliant scintillating light was very interesting right there, that beams coming down. Within watercolor, once again, I think you could potentially do it with gouache, but a lot of fast and loose painters will just do that quick dry brush over the white paper to get that effect, and some people are just real masters of it. I think people that are producing videos that have done stuff like that, Lois Davidson, I think she would have examples of that. And that's something that I think we should pursue in future watercolor videos. All right. Now, once again, it seems like a lot of the times the foregrounds themselves are kind of a mishmash of very dark tones, and it's not quite easy to see with some flowers throughout. It just seems to be a common theme that I see popping up over and over again. We had a lot of layers of foliage, trees, bushes, and whatnot. That was quite interesting. And somebody on the Ron Ranson Facebook page had posted a painting where he did his midground with his darks and then coming closer had his lights, and he talked about sometimes reversing those. And you see that kind of happening here. And I mean, it's happening because this light behind this mountain, and it's catching and highlighting these guys. But that depth was interesting. There's kind of the coniferous trees coming up, and I'll talk about how I tried modeling that with the pen and ink. With watercolor, this is something that I want to explore as well, seeing how to get that subtlety there. Also, it's the reverse of what I've been doing with foliage, where I've been doing light on the outside rim of the foliage and then darker on the inside. So that'll be interesting to play around with. And then once again, we have a lot of layers, typical of the 1800 style painting. So overall, I mean, I just really love this painting. It just really jumped out at me, and it was really fun to explore and sketch. I'm going to show you my sketch now. This was done with Noodlers, Heart of Darkness. It's a fountain pen ink. They call it an eternal bulletproof ink, where it's pretty waterproof, but if I was to apply water, it might move some of it because it sits on top as well and it's not soaked into this paper. And I used a very simple eyedropper pen that came with it. I first started off modeling the hunter right there. I didn't silhouette him like he was in the painting, just because I kind of liked the way he came out. And also, the way I modeled him, it seemed like he's almost turning back and looking over at us, which, unfortunately, is kind of a direct fight against the original painting, where if he's looking back at us, he's not observing the scene. And they often used people within the scene to direct eyes and see what they were looking at and observing. For instance, he was most likely observing maybe this bird that was flying and taking place. Anyway, so as I modeled things around him, I focused on how those lines interacted. Here I made sure it was off to the side. Here I made sure that was off. This guy didn't line up. And even here, I tried to have a variety in the bases. So that was kind of just compositional modeling taking place. The coniferous trees, I tried putting them in this fashion, vertical lines, filling them in, vertical lines, filling them in, and then doing an overall very heavy shading so that there would be the subtle differences. So hopefully that reads as that dark mountain with the coniferous trees in front. I had to layer these guys. When I put them in, I just put them in kind of light because they were catching the light, and there was a lot of shadows along the bases. It receded back, so I paid attention to size and whatnot, and size as well as, what's the term? I guess density of the strokes, you know, kind of minimizing them. With some trees, I was experimenting with putting in dark scribbles and then a line right on the outside to have just the light and dark aspect within it. The sky itself, there was quite a bit going on. His painting just looked like a photograph. It looked fantastic. What I think I should have done in hindsight was actually start putting in the light beams negatively, like have this negative right here being a light beam put in where there isn't a light beam, and let that get a perfect flow over into the scene. So I think that would have been the way to do that, drawing wise. Painting wise, I think there's a lot of things you can do to manipulate that. Another thing I noticed, and I didn't talk about it with looking at his painting, was these ridges and these mountains and hills. There was little modeling of trees and whatnot, and that really reminded me when I was studying the Chinese scroll paintings, the landscape paintings, where it was very common to have a hill and then model a few trees up on top or a small little building and whatnot. So it just felt like it reminded me of that. I did horizontal dots here to try to get that scintillating effect. I feel as though he had this paper might not be white enough in order to achieve that whiteness that he had there. I mean, obviously he used white oil paint. I'm not sure if they had what paint they had. It might have been lead white. I don't know if they had titanium white yet back then, but it might have been one of those. And I think this paper just maybe wasn't bright enough. Anyway, let's see, what else did I do on this? For this whole mishmash in the front, I tried to just overlap layers and just get textural, overall horizontal feel, and mix that up. Felt that this spot right here was really important to help show that this was water taking place. But overall, it was a very fun study, very fun experiment. Music-wise, I was listening to Electric Light Orchestra and Supertramp, the Breakfast in America album, which I was listening to last night for my other sketch. So that was fun. And hopefully, you know, we'll see how this carries over into watercolor and oil painting and what I wind up doing from there. So if you have any questions, please ask. If there's anything you'd like me to talk about in future videos, of course, you know, ask. Link to Patreon down below. I'd really appreciate your support. And I think that's about it. I hope you all have a great day.